Can you install UniFi OS Server onto a Raspberry Pi? The answer is yes, it's super easy. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to do it from start to finish, step by step. Let's get started. UniFi OS Server is the latest generation of self-hosted UniFi network. It's great for situations where you have UniFi equipment, such as access points and switches, but you don't have a UniFi gateway. It's also very useful for UniFi gateway devices that don't come with UniFi OS on board. And mainly, we're talking about the UXG lineup of gateways. So if you have a Dream Router, a Dream Machine, a Dream Wall, or any of the UCG cloud gateway models, those already come with UniFi OS, so you do not need a separate controller. And of course, if you're having any trouble figuring out which equipment is best for you, remember that the expert technicians at Rogue Support are standing by, ready to assist you with any of your network design, setup, or troubleshooting needs. You can just visit us on the web at rogue.support and then click Get Support to open a ticket. Now, while UniFi OS can be installed onto a Raspberry Pi, if you're an MSP hosting UniFi OS Server on behalf of your customers, this isn't the best way to do it. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be assuming that your Raspberry Pi UniFi OS Server is for controlling just your own local network devices, and you're not going to be exposed through your firewall. If you're interested in a more robust UniFi OS Server installation on hosted Linux with hardened firewall rules and a Let's Encrypt certificate, well, I did a video on that last week, and I'm going to put a link to that video down in the description below. And finally, before we get started, I am going to be creating a step-by-step guide on how to do all of this on my blog at crosstalksolutions.com, just in case you want to have full written instructions and so that you can copy and paste all the commands. All right, so the link to that blog post will also be down in the description. To get started, what we're going to need is a Raspberry Pi and a micro SD card. Now, I don't know the minimum requirements in terms of CPU and RAM for UniFi OS Server, but I would guess that if you've got at least a Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gigs of RAM, you'll probably be okay. If anyone has installed this onto Raspberry Pis with fewer or less resources than that, let me know down in the comments. But for this video, I'm using a Raspberry Pi 5 with 8 gigs of RAM. There is a minimum in terms of micro SD card space, and that's going to be 20 gigs. So I'm going to say you're going to want a minimum of a 32 gig micro SD card, but the one I'm using for this example is 128 gigs. So you want to start by putting your micro SD card into your PC and then run the Raspberry Pi imager, which you can find at raspberrypi.com/software. Okay, so once you have the Raspberry Pi imager up and running, you want to choose your device. In my case, I'm working with a Raspberry Pi 5. Then you want to choose your operating system. And for this, I'm going to come down here to Other General Purpose OS, and we're going to choose Ubuntu and Ubuntu Server 25.04. Now, this probably works on a variety of flavors of Raspberry Pi OS and Linux and all that. I'm using Ubuntu because I know for sure that's going to work. Then we want to choose our storage. And in this case, I'm going to pick the 132 or 128 gig micro SD card. And be extra careful when you're choosing your storage, because if you choose the wrong thing, this is going to overwrite it completely and you're going to lose whatever was on that device. Now we're going to say next, and it's going to ask if we'd like to apply OS customization settings. So let's go ahead and say edit settings. And then we're going to set a host name. I'm just going to call this UniFi OS Server. We do want to set a username and password. I'm going to say Pi and then give it a strong password. I do not want to configure a wireless LAN because I'm going to be plugging this in via Ethernet. And then I'm going to set my time zone and keyboard layout. And then over on the Services tab, I want to enable SSH with password authentication, because the moment this boots up, I want to be able to SSH in remotely rather than having to use a keyboard and mouse on the console of the Raspberry Pi. So that should be good enough. We're going to say save, and then yes to apply those settings, and then yes to write to the disk. And now Ubuntu is being written to that micro SD card. Once you have your micro SD card flashed, you can go ahead and pop it into your Raspberry Pi. And then you're also going to want to connect up an Ethernet cable, as well as any monitor, keyboard, mouse that you want to use. So in my case, I've got this portable monitor, and then I'm just using one of these, keyboard and mouse USB things. Now, this does basically run headless, right? So you're not going to need a monitor, keyboard, and mouse attached to the Raspberry Pi at all times, but you may want to use it for this initial setup. All right, so the next thing you want to do is power up your Raspberry Pi, and then you're going to want to let it boot up for about a couple of minutes. And eventually, you're going to be able to just hit enter and log in with the credentials that we created when we were flashing the micro SD card with the Raspberry Pi imager. If you know the IP address of your Raspberry Pi, you should be able to SSH into it at this point. And if you don't know the IP address, you can find it by logging into the console and then typing IP space A at the Ubuntu command line. Or you can check your firewall's DHCP leases to see which IP address the Pi was given. Now, since your UniFi devices are going to be checking in with this server on a regular basis, it's also a good idea to set up a DHCP reservation or a static IP address so that the IP address of the Pi never changes. Now, once you've logged into the Pi with SSH, the first thing you want to do is get everything updated. So here I've connected with PuTTY. We're going to say accept. We're going to log in with my credentials. And then we're going to say sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade -y. Enter. It's going to ask for password. Put that in. Enter. And then we're going to let the Ubuntu server on the Raspberry Pi update to the latest and greatest. Once your updates are complete, you're going to want to install Podman. Now, this is the container application that UniFi OS Server uses. It's kind of similar to Docker. So to install Podman, we just need to do sudo apt install podman -y. And that should just take about a minute or so. The next thing that we want to do is download the UniFi OS Server installer. And since we're running on a Raspberry Pi with Ubuntu, we want to download the Linux ARM64 version. You can find the download links on the UniFi OS Server release notes page. And if we scroll down here, we should see our download links. So we just want to right click on the one that says Linux ARM64 and copy link address. Then we go back over into SSH and we're going to say wget and we're going to do shift insert to paste that into our command line and hit enter, and that will download the installer for UniFi OS Server. Now, since the installer is not executable right off the bat, we also need to do chmod +x, and then the name of this installer is like F791-Linux, so we're just going to say F7 tab, enter. That makes that installer executable. Now we say /F7 tab install, enter, and it requires root privileges. So we can say sudo !! to run the previous command with our root privileges, and yes. All right, now UniFi OS Server is being installed. Once it finishes, you want to give it about 2 minutes or so to spin up the container before you actually attempt to connect via browser. So I'm going to turn this off and we will come back when that's ready to go. Okay, so installation has been completed for UniFi OS Server. Now notice this note right here. To grant permission for a user to run UOS server commands, you want to enter in this other command here. This is basically adding your current user, which in our case is the Pi user, because that's what we created to log into the Raspberry Pi. You want to add it to the UOS server group so that it can run UOS server commands. Now, I am not aware of what you can do with UOS server commands, but it sounds like a good idea that I might want to do in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and run through that command, and we're going to say sudo usermod -a G UOS server and then Pi. So that command is easy enough. Now let's bring up our URL, which you can see right here, https:// IP address of my Pi : port 11443. Let's bring that up in a browser. All right, advanced and proceed. And there we go. We have our UniFi OS Server Setup Installation Wizard. Let's run through this real quickly. Now, if you have a backup that you need to restore, you can do that right here where it says restore from backup. But we're going to call this UOS Server Raspberry Pi. And we'll say next. Now we're going to sign into our UI account. And notice down here it says this software is licensed for personal or organizational use only. Resale, redistribution, or commercial exploitation is strictly prohibited. We're going to agree to those terms. They're basically saying they don't want you to resell UniFi hosting by using their free software. All right, so we're going to say sign in. Okay, then it's going to ask you if you want to restore from backup again. We're going to say continue without backup since this is a brand new instance of UniFi OS Server. And then it is now setting up UniFi OS. It's that simple. Now, while that's happening, I'm going to boot up an access point, and then I'm going to factory reset it so that we can adopt this access point to my Raspberry Pi UniFi OS server. Okay, and while that's booting up, it says setup is complete. So we're going to go to the dashboard. And you will also be able to administer this through the cloud at unifi.ui.com. So you could administer it locally or through the cloud, however you want to do it. Okay, so the access point has a solid white ring. I know that's hard to see in the lighting here, but if you look in UniFi, it is ready to adopt. So we're going to say click to adopt. And again, this is an instance where I don't have a UniFi Cloud Gateway with UniFi OS on board as part of this network, or as far as this access point knows, I don't. So that's where you can use something like UniFi OS Server for UniFi equipment if you've got a third-party gateway or even an edge router or something that's not managed by UniFi. Okay, so the U7 Pro XG has been successfully adopted into UniFi. We can see that it's connected to my UOS server Raspberry Pi, and we have a blue light on the access point, which means that it is good to go. All right, so from here, you just configure UniFi normally, and that is all there is to it. Now, if you have any devices on your network that aren't showing up in UniFi, you can always just factory reset those devices with a paperclip, and then they should appear in the devices section of UniFi within a minute or two. If you have an older legacy UniFi network controller, or for example, a Cloud Key Gen 2 or the original Cloud Key, and you want to migrate to this new UniFi OS server, I did a full video on how to migrate sites from an older controller to UniFi OS Server, and I will put a link to that video down in the comments below. One thing that I should mention is that running a production UniFi OS server on a Raspberry Pi is not necessarily the best long-term solution since these micro SD cards are prone to failure. So first thing to know is that your UniFi configuration is backed up to the cloud weekly. So if this ever fails, you can simply just spin up a new UniFi OS server and then restore the most recent backup. Or another way to mitigate failure is to use an external M.2 or SATA SSD hard drive for your Raspberry Pi. Now there's tons of guides online that show you how to copy the boot volume of the Raspberry Pi from the micro SD card over to the SSD. And it's easiest to do that sort of right after initially booting up the Pi before you install UniFi OS Server. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you'd like to keep this party going, I have hand-selected a couple of videos on the right here for you to watch next. The top video is my full install of UniFi OS Server onto hosted Linux with firewall rules and a Let's Encrypt certificate, and the bottom video is my guide to migrating sites from a legacy controller over to this new next-generation UniFi OS Server.